Vivian woke up at dawn. The smell of rain from last night hung in the air. She was in the mood to do some cleaning, especially in the attic, which had long served as a warehouse for old things. It seemed that for many years she had never really looked there, leaving the past locked under lock and key. Pulling her hair back into her ponytail and throwing on an old flannel shirt, she climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. A small window let in scant light, illuminating a pile of boxes, an antique chest, and a yellowed carpet. Dust hung in the air, but to Vivian the smell was familiar, almost comforting. She began to sort through the boxes, finding old albums, postcards, David's children's toys, and her old school books. A small wooden chest in the corner caught her attention. It was locked, and there was a key on a darkened chain on top. She didn't remember ever seeing him before. When she opened the trunk, they were neatly folded letters, tied with ribbon, and a small stack of photographs inside. Vivian's heart beat faster when she saw her mother's handwriting on the envelopes. She sat down on the floor, holding the first envelope in her hands. Its date was written more than 40 years ago. She read the first lines and her breath caught in her throat. "Dear Emma, sometimes I feel like I've made a terrible mistake, but I can't afford to think otherwise. The secret about David should remain just between us." Vivian froze. She turned the letter over, ran her eyes over the lines, not believing her eyes. In the following paragraphs, the mother wrote about a man named Robert, who was like salvation, but became the cause of all the troubles. She mentioned that Robert left town when he found out about her pregnancy. Those words echoed in Vivian's head. She put down the letter and picked up the next note with trembling hands. In each new letter, her mother revealed more and more details of what she was hiding. David was the son of another man, not her father. He was born out of love, but that love was not destined to last. She looked at the photos. One of them showed her mother with a strange man. He had dark hair, high cheekbones, and a smile that Vivian would have recognized from 1,000. It was David's smile. A rustle on the stairs interrupted her thoughts. It was David. He went upstairs when he saw her sitting on the floor with letters in her hands.
"Are you okay, Viv?" He stopped, looking at her anxiously.
"I found something." Her voice trembled.
David sat down next to her, picking up one of the letters. He ran his eyes over the lines and then looked at Vivian.
"Are these letters from Mom?"
"Yes, and they're about you, David. About your past."
"My past?" He frowned. "What do you mean?"
She took a deep breath, trying to collect her thoughts.
David, you are not our father's son."
His eyes widened and then narrowed in disbelief.
"What? Is this some kind of joke?"
"No, I found the letters. Mom wrote about a man named Robert. She said he was your father."
He was silent for a long time, looking at the photo.
"But that doesn't change anything, does it?"
"Of course it does." She could feel the panic in her voice. Everything we knew was not true.
"Viv, listen to me. I didn't know about it, but it doesn't change who I was to you."
"But it changes us, David. We thought we were brother and sister. We built our lives on this basis."
"And it shouldn't ruin anything. Yes, it's a shock, but that doesn't negate everything we have."
Her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to believe him, but this new knowledge seemed too destructive.
"I do not know what to think now."
"Then think like this. I'm still the same person who has always been there for me, and you are everything to me."
He hugged her, and she felt her tension ease a little, but there was still a shadow of doubt inside. This mystery of the past became for them both a test and an opportunity to start all over again. Now they understood that their bond was not limited to blood ties. It was something more, that they had to determine for themselves. Vivian couldn't calm down for a long time after reading her mother's letters. The mystery of David's real father threw her into confusion, but also awakened something more, a desire to understand and find out the truth to the end. She couldn't let these letters remain just a memory hidden in the dust of an old chest. She felt that there was something else hidden behind her mother's words and decided to figure it out. Among the letters, she found one addressed to a woman named Emma with the caption, "Forever your friend Lillian." In the letter, the mother talked about her difficult life after the breakup with Robert, about how hard it was for her to raise David alone. But the last line caught Vivian's attention. "If David ever finds out the truth, let him understand that I did everything to protect him. Emma, I know you understand this better than anyone else." Vivian knew who Emma was. She was her mother's best friend in her youth. The last time she saw Emma was at her mother's funeral many years ago. Then Emma seemed to her a wise but restrained woman who always knew how to say what was really needed. Vivian decided to find her to understand what her mother was talking about. The next day, she told David about her plan. He supported her, although he was visibly worried. His concern was expressed, not in words, but in the way he avoided meeting her gaze, as if he was afraid that the truth they would learn would change their lives even more. After several hours of searching through old address books and calling the city administration, Vivian managed to find Emma's phone number. She lived in a nearby town, just an hour away. They agreed to meet on neutral territory, in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. Emma was the same woman Vivian remembered, slightly bent, with piercing eyes that seemed too smart for her age. When Vivian and David entered the cafe, Emma rose from her seat, her lips curved in a restrained smile.
"Vivian, I haven't seen you in a while." Her voice was low but firm.
"Emma, thank you for agreeing to meet. It is very important." Emma shifted her gaze to David, narrowing her eyes.
"And you should be David."
"Yes, I'm glad to meet you." Emma nodded and pointed to the chairs opposite her. When everyone was seated, she looked at Vivian carefully.
"I know why you are here. Lillian has always been afraid that this day would come."
Vivian felt something tighten in her chest.
Did you know about Robert?
Emma nodded, then looked at David. "I knew Robert better than you can imagine."
Then tell me, who is he? Why did he leave us?
"It's not that simple, David. You have to understand that your mother was trying to protect you. Robert wasn't a bad person, but he wasn't ready to be a father. He was confusing."
Confusing? What does it mean?
Emma sighed and folded her hands on the table.
Robert was a man who was looking for himself. He dreamed of freedom, of a life that was not bound by obligations. When Lillian got pregnant, he was scared. He had feelings for her, but he just didn't know how to be the man she deserved.
And he just left?
"Yes," Emma said softly. But later he tried to come back."
These words made Vivian wary.
Come back.
"Lillian never told you about it, but a few years after you were born, Robert tried to contact her. He wanted to get to know you, David, but Lillian decided it would be best for both of you."
Why?
She was afraid that he would disappear again, that he would break your heart the same way he broke hers.
Emma's words hung in the air like a heavy weight. David nodded slowly, but Vivian noticed that he was struggling to contain his emotions.
Emma, do you think he's still alive?
Emma hesitated, then nodded.
"I think so." He's been living in Chicago for the last few years. I've heard that he sometimes asks about Lillian.
Does he know about me?
"Yes, and I think he'd like to see you if you're ready."
These words stunned Vivian. She had always believed that their past was a closed chapter, but now, with this new knowledge, everything seemed much more complicated.
Emma, are you sure he's changed?
People change, Vivian. Sometimes years and regrets can make a person better.
The conversation continued for a few more minutes, but Vivian and David felt depressed. They thanked Emma and left the cafe. It was a warm autumn outside, but the air felt cold. Vivian and David walked in silence, each lost in his own thoughts.
Do you think we should find him?
I don't know. It's your decision, David.
And if he disappears again?
Then at least you'll know who he is.
David nodded, but his face remained tense. Vivian felt that this path would not be easy for him, but at the same time, she understood that this was the only way to close this chapter of their lives. life in the new city was gradually improving. Vivian and David sought to settle into their new reality, which was far from the condemnation and tension they had left behind. Their house has turned into a cozy place, filled with books, photos, and memories of better days. They tried to keep their distance from the locals, enjoying relative anonymity, but like any secret, their story could not remain hidden forever. At first glance, the new community looked calm and friendly. People greeted them with smiles, and neighbors even brought homemade cakes as a sign of good neighborly relations. But small towns are known for their close connectivity. Soon curious glances began to linger longer than usual, and friendly conversations took on notes of excessive interest. One of these observant people turned out to be their neighbor, Mr. Carter. He looked like a friendly man in his 50s, with always disheveled hair and a slightly cynical smile. He introduced himself as a writer and journalist working for a local newspaper. Carter, as it turned out, had a nose for unusual stories, and his attention was drawn to the way Vivian and David held on to each other. Their solitary lifestyle and unwillingness to actively communicate with others aroused his suspicions. One day, Carter came to their house under the pretext of collecting material for an article about the new residents of the city. He suggested writing an article about Vivian and David's new stage of life, portraying himself as a friendly and interested neighbor. Vivian was wary, but David, wanting to show that they had no reason to keep secrets, agreed. The interview went smoothly. Carter asked the standard questions: where they came from, what they were doing, how they liked the new city. However, something about his questions made Vivian feel uncomfortable. He emphasized their relationship, asking overly personal questions about why they decided to move in together and why they didn't have other family members supporting them. These questions made her tense up, but David tried to keep a low profile, answering in such a way as not to arouse suspicion. A few days later, Carter reappeared, this time without warning. He asked even more direct questions, which Vivian tried to ignore. She began to realize that his interest was not so much friendly as professionally curious. His behavior reminded her of a shark smelling blood. She asked him to leave, but at that moment, Carton quietly said that he knew something about them. It was the beginning of the end of their quiet life in a new place. Carter started an investigation. He found old recordings from their past town, where rumors about Vivian and David had become a local legend. Fragments of this information became the basis for the article he planned to publish. Carter wasn't looking for a sensation out of spite, but as a journalist he felt it was his duty to uncover an unusual story, even if it might harm its participants. A few days later, Vivian and David received the news. Their neighbor was going to publish an article in the local newspaper. The headline of the article promised a scandal. The unusual connection of new residents. What are they hiding? This news hit them like a bolt from the blue. Their attempts to live a quiet life collapsed. Vivian was crushed. She was worried that their new life, their chance for a peaceful future, would be ruined again because of someone else's curiosity. Her anxiety increased to such an extent that she could hardly speak, just sat by the window and stared into the void. David, on the other hand, was determined. He knew Carter wasn't acting out of malice, but that didn't lessen the threat. David decided to meet with Carter to try to stop the publication. He knew that honesty was his only weapon. At the meeting, he told Carter the whole truth, about how their bond had strengthened over the years, how they had overcome difficulties together, how the condemnation of society had forced them to leave. He did not try to justify himself, but asked Carter to reconsider her plans. David said that the publication would not only harm their lives, but would also be a reminder of the injustice they had already endured. Carter, after listening to him, visibly softened. He hadn't expected such frankness. For him, it was a lesson that behind a curious story, there are real people with real suffering. He proposed a compromise. He would rewrite the article so that it would not reveal their identities or cause damage, but at the same time raise the topic of condemnation and bias in society. For Vivian and David, it was a partial success. They managed to avoid the full disclosure of their secret. but they realized that even in a new city, their connection remains under threat. This situation forced them to reconsider their behavior. They decided that they would no longer try to hide. Instead, they will live the way they want and let those who condemn them do it openly. This experience showed them that the struggle for their happiness is inevitable. Their love was tested by another blow, but it withstood, and with it their confidence in the correctness of the chosen path grew. After the incident with Mr. Carter, the tranquility that Vivian and David had been striving for in the new city was under threat. Even though the article in the local newspaper was reworked and did not reveal all the details of their relationship, its general tone made the residents of the city think. The article subtly hinted at the strangeness of their relationship, and although the names were not mentioned, many guessed that they were talking about new residents. At first, Vivian and David tried to ignore the sidelong glances and the changed behavior of the neighbors. However, over time, it has become increasingly difficult to ignore. They could feel their surroundings changing. People who used to smile affably now avoided them. At the grocery store, cashiers would start discussing them right after they walked out the door. In the neighborhood community, where they used to look for reasons to talk, there was now a tense silence when someone mentioned their names. It was especially hard for Vivian. She has always been a person who aspired to harmony with others. She used to be able to find common ground with almost everyone, but now she felt like a stranger even where she wanted. Start all over again. Every day was a challenge for her. Her inner voice wouldn't stop. They're judging you. They will never accept you. These thoughts became a heavy burden that was impossible to get rid of. David, on the contrary, tried to deal with the situation more decisively. He knew that such changes were inevitable and believed that they just needed to wait it out. "People will get used to it," he often said when he noticed Vivian's anxiety. However, despite his confidence, he felt the pressure himself. While working at a local architectural firm, he began to notice that his colleagues avoided unnecessary communication with him. Projects that had previously been assigned to him suddenly began to be transferred to other employees. One day, at a meeting, his supervisor made an awkward hint, which David took as a reproach. All this undermined his confidence. The climax occurred one Saturday afternoon when Vivian and David decided to go on a city holiday. This annual festival was the main event in the life of a small town. He gathered all the residents, offering food, music, and entertainment for the children. For Vivian, it was a chance to prove to herself and others that she could still be a part of the community. She prepared carefully. She chose her best dress, made a cake for the fair, and set herself up in a positive way. But from the very beginning, everything went wrong. When they arrived at the square where most of the townspeople had already gathered, their appearance immediately attracted attention. People did not hide their curiosity and condemnation. The whispers grew louder until they became loud whispers. Some frowned, some even turned away. Vivian tried to keep calm, but her smile began to fade. David squeezed her hand, but even that couldn't completely calm her down. They tried to occupy themselves with small things. They tasted food, watched a performance by a local ensemble, but everything around them seemed to scream that they were not welcome here. The culmination was that one of the old-timers of the city, Mr. Thompson, could not restrain himself and said loudly, "I don't think people with such a reputation should be here." These words sounded like a bolt from the blue. Vivian felt her face flush with shame. David was about to answer, but Vivian stopped him with a look. They left the party in silence, feeling dozens of condemning eyes on them. This case was a turning point. Vivian and David realized that they could no longer just wait for people to change their minds. They needed to do something to regain their place in society, otherwise their lives would turn into a constant flight. But what exactly? They discussed it for a long time, sitting in their living room, where their cozy home seemed to be the only safe place. Vivian offered to talk to St. Victoria's directly to try to explain her point of view to them. David, on the contrary, believed that it was necessary to act decisively and openly declare his position in front of everyone. Their decision came in the form of an open letter which they decided to publish in a local newspaper. This letter was honest, sincere, and brave. In it, Vivian and David talked about their past, about how they became not just a family for each other, but real partners who support each other in the most difficult situations. They wrote that their love should not be the object of condemnation, and that they, like everyone else, had the right to happiness. The publication caused a storm of emotions. Some residents found the letter of provocation, others took it with sympathy. Discussions began on the streets, which gradually turned into disputes. A debate was organized in the city library, where people could express their opinions. Vivian and David decided to attend them, despite the risk. Their decision was based on one thing: if they want to be accepted, they must show their willingness to defend their truth. Dozens of citizens attended the debate. Someone said that their relationship is a personal matter, and no one has the right to interfere. Others, on the contrary, argued that such connections violate the traditional foundations of society. Vivian felt strong for the first time in a long time when she stood up to tell her story. Her voice was trembling, but her words were full of sincerity. She talked about how difficult it was to lose a family, face condemnation, and try to find yourself anew. She said that she did not demand understanding from everyone, but at least asked for respect. Her performance caused silence in the hall. Many thought about it, but there were also those who persisted. The debate did not solve the problem once and for all, but it was the first step towards the city starting to look at Vivian and David differently. It was a success for them. They did not hide, did not run away, but openly declared their truth. A few weeks passed and life slowly began to return to normal. People began to whisper less behind their backs. Some even came up to thank them for their courage. This did not mean that everyone accepted them, but they began to feel that their struggle made sense. Vivian and David realized that society can be changed if you are sincere and not afraid to move forward despite obstacles. After stressful months, when their lives were turned upside down by the conviction in a new city, Vivian and David began to notice that the pressure, which seemed unbearable, began to ease. Their open letter, the debate in the library, and the shared determination not to back down forced many residents to rethink their attitude. But despite this, the internal tension between Vivian and David continued to grow. Their relationship had long gone beyond simple support, but what was natural for them remained unacceptable to society. Vivian became more and more lost in thought. She spent long hours in the garden, trying to find answers to the questions that haunted her. She was thinking about her life, about what it meant to be honest with herself. Her past has always been built on sacrifice, for her brother, for her family, for those who needed her help. But now, for the first time, she was faced with a choice that concerned only herself. This choice was not just difficult, it was scary, because it required her to completely reconsider all the moral foundations on which she had built her life. The situation worsened when a man from the past re-entered their lives. It was Thomas, Vivian's longtime friend, who had once been her support in her youth. They had not seen each other for more than 10 years, and his arrival was unexpected. Thomas learned about Vivian's difficulties from a casual conversation with a mutual friend and decided to come to support her. He had always been a determined man, ready to act, and his appearance in Vivian's life was another challenge. Thomas was full of energy and optimism. He saw Vivian as the girl he remembered, strong, kind, always ready to sacrifice her interests for others. He immediately noticed how her life had changed and offered her an alternative. Thomas worked for a large charity and was looking for someone who could head one of the branches. He offered Vivian this job, which included moving to another city. It was a chance for her to start over, a new life, new people, a new goal. The idea of moving seemed tempting. Vivian felt that this could be her salvation from public pressure and internal conflict. Thomas was a reminder that she could have lived differently if she hadn't stayed in the past for David. He talked about independence, about personal freedom, about the opportunity to help people while preserving himself. But behind every suggestion he made, there was a difficult question. Could she have left David? David, despite his outward calmness, felt that something was changing. He saw how Vivian spent more and more time thinking, how she became detached, how her smile disappeared. He understood that Thomas had awakened something in her that she had long suppressed, the desire to be yourself, to live for yourself. It hurt him, but he was honest enough with himself to admit that he couldn't be everything to her. For several weeks, Vivian was faced with a choice. She tried to imagine her life without David, but every time she did, she felt empty. David had become more than just a brother or a life partner for her. He was her rock, her soul, her other half. But at the same time, she couldn't deny that Thomas was right. She deserved more than to be the object of condemnation and constant struggle for the right to exist. The turning point was a letter that Vivian found in one of her old diaries. It was her own message to herself, written in her youth when she was just starting to build her dreams. In this letter, she wrote about how she wanted to change the world, help people, inspire them. She promised herself that she would never let her fears or responsibilities limit her. After reading this, Vivian realized that she had broken her promise. She realized that she was not living her own life, but the life that circumstances had forced her to choose. These reflections led her to realize that in order to make the right choice, she needed to understand what she really wanted. Thomas offered her a move and a new life, but that would mean leaving David. Staying with David meant continuing the struggle to accept their relationship, but at the same time giving up on their own development. Both paths were filled with difficulties, but both promised something she had never experienced before: freedom. In the end, Vivian decided that she could no longer live in fear of being judged. She realized that her happiness does not depend on what others think, but only on how she feels. She couldn't imagine her life without David. Despite all the difficulties, their connection was what filled her life with meaning. Thomas, with his offer of a new life, became an important reminder that she could live for herself, but her heart had already chosen. She refused Thomas's offer. It wasn't an easy decision for her, but it was an honest one. She explained to him that her place was with David, and that their love, no matter how difficult it was worth all the sacrifices. Thomas respected her choice, but his look of regret left a slight bitterness in her. Vivian returned home to tell David that she would no longer doubt. She realized that real freedom is to live according to your feelings, regardless of what the world thinks. Her choice of heart was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, where there was no longer room for doubts and fears. After Vivian finally decided to stay with David, her life took on a new direction. She no longer doubted her choice, but with confidence came the realization that their struggle was not over yet. Accepting yourself is one thing, but living openly, without hiding or feeling guilty about your feelings, is quite another. The transition from internal reconciliation to openly acknowledging her life to the world turned out to be much more difficult than she expected. Despite their efforts to mend relations with their neighbors after the library debate and their outspoken letter, condemnation and distrust remained. The people were polite but cold, which further emphasized their detachment. As Vivian and David walked down the street, they still felt other people's eyes on them, noticed how conversations suddenly stopped. Even those who tried to be friendly couldn't hide a tinge of wariness in their behavior. For Vivian, every day was a challenge. She tried to convince herself that it didn't matter, that she and David could handle everything if they stuck together. But she also knew that it was impossible to live in such a state for a long time. In the silence, when they were alone, the tension became almost palpable. Vivian saw David, despite his outward firmness, becoming more and more withdrawn into himself. She knew that he felt responsible for making her life so difficult, and it broke her heart. One evening, while watching the local news, Vivian noticed that the city council was preparing for an annual public meeting where important issues for the entire city were discussed. These were usually minor problems, road conditions, park improvements, holidays. But this year, the meeting was going to discuss the relations of new residents, who allegedly undermined the moral foundations of society. It was the hidden blow that she was afraid of. Their existence has become so controversial that it has infiltrated official discussions. This news was a turning point for Vivian and David. If they had previously tried to come to terms with the condemnation of society, now they had to defend themselves openly. To leave things as they were meant to admit that they were willing to live in fear and let others define their lives. But to speak in front of everyone meant to come out of the shadows completely, once and for all, declaring that they deserved the right to be happy. Some of them would spare her life. Confession to a killer, worse often published later, had no longer let rumors and innuendos corrode their lives. She knew that their open confession would make them even more vulnerable. However, they both knew that this was their only chance. They could no longer let rumors and innuendos corrode their lives. A few days before the meeting, Vivian and David prepared their speech. They decided to be extremely honest, to tell the whole story, about their childhood, about how they became not just a family for each other, but also the closest people. They decided to explain that their relationship does not detract from anyone's morality, that their love is just a way to be happy in a world full of cruelty and loneliness. They wanted to show that their struggle is not an attack on social norms, but only an attempt to live in harmony with themselves. When the day of the meeting came, the whole of the city administration was full. People sat shoulder to shoulder, discussing upcoming issues, but many came precisely because of Vivian and David. They knew that the couple was going to perform and wanted to hear their words. When it was their turn to speak, Vivian and David went to the microphone. There was silence in the hall. Vivian could feel her heart pounding, but when she looked at David, his gaze gave her confidence. She started talking about how hard it was for them to build their lives, how they fought for every day of happiness. She said that they are not looking for approval, but they want respect. Her voice was trembling, but every word sounded clear and sincere. David continued by explaining how the love they have for each other has helped them overcome difficulties that could have broken many. He said that their relationship is a choice made by the heart, and that no one has the right to deprive them of this choice. His voice was firm, but at the same time it sounded vulnerable to a man who had been trying for years to earn the right to happiness. Their performance evoked different emotions. Some sat in tense silence, others exchanged disapproving glances. However, there were those in the audience who listened with understanding. When they finished, there was silence for a moment, and then there was applause. They were not loud but sincere, and at that moment Vivian felt that their efforts had not been in vain. After the meeting, several people came up to them to express their support. Among them was an elderly woman who said that in her youth she faced condemnation for her life choices, and she understands how difficult it is. There were also those who just shook hands without saying a word, but their gestures said more than words. This recognition was an important step for Vivian and David. They knew that not everyone would accept them, but now they felt that they could look into people's eyes without fear. Their performance became a symbol of their strength and willingness to fight for their place in society. Life did not immediately become easier. The condemnation was still in the air, but now they knew that there were those among them who supported them. This gave them the strength to continue. Vivian no longer felt like a prisoner of public opinion. She realized that her life belongs only to her and that her happiness is worth all the difficulties. This was not the end of their struggle, but the beginning of a new chapter where they could be honest not only with themselves, but also with the world. And although this path was not easy, it was real, and that was what filled their lives with meaning. After that memorable speech at the city administration meeting, Vivian and David's lives began to change. Their frankness shocked the society, but did not break it. The wave of condemnation, which seemed unbearable, began to subside. People stopped avoiding them on the street, and some even approached them with warm words, apologies and thanks for their courage. Vivian noticed that even her closest neighbor, Mrs. Harper, who had previously maintained a suspicious silence, once brought a pie and said with a good-natured smile, "I don't quite understand what you're going through, but I'm glad you had the courage to tell me about it. You are stronger than I thought." These simple words became a symbol for Vivian that, despite fear and pain, the world is still capable of changing if given a chance. But their struggle did not end there. Each new day brought its own challenges. One of the most difficult challenges was the unexpected interest from the media. Mr. Carter's article, although rewritten in a neutral manner, spread across the internet and attracted the attention of several larger publications. Soon, a journalist from a metropolitan newspaper appeared on their doorstep, who offered to interview them for an article about modern couples who destroy stereotypes. Vivian was against it. She still felt vulnerable and unprepared for their story to be discussed outside their small town. But David, on the contrary, believed that this was a chance not only for them, but also for other people in a similar situation. After much discussion and doubt, they decided to agree. The interview took place in their cozy living room. The journalist turned out to be unexpectedly tactful and asked questions that concerned not so much the details of their relationship as their views on social norms, condemnation, and the right to happiness. For the first time, Vivian felt that she was being heard and not just evaluated. A week later, the article was published. It was written with respect and sympathy, but its release caused a violent reaction. Disputes broke out on social networks. Some defended Vivian and David, saying that love knows no boundaries. Others accused them of violating morality and undermining traditional values. Vivian tried not to read the comments, but the echoes of these discussions reached her anyway. To Vivian's surprise, their support was much broader than she had expected. People started writing letters to them, sharing their stories about how they fought for the right to be themselves. Some of the letters were full of gratitude for their courage, others were cries for help. One of these letters came from a woman named Linda from a neighboring state. She said that she has been hiding her feelings for her stepbrother for several years and is afraid of condemnation. Linda wrote, "Your story has given me hope. You've shown that sometimes it's worth risking everything to be happy. Thank you for being there." These letters inspired Vivian and David. They realized that their story no longer belongs only to them. She has become a symbol for those who fight for the right to love and acceptance. They decided that they would not be silent. Together with Mr. Carter, who became their ally after their performance, they organized a series of meetings at the local library. These meetings have become a platform for frank conversations about love, condemnation, and prejudice. People from their city and surrounding areas came to share their stories or just listen. Some of these meetings ended in tears, others in loud argument, but each of them brought something important: dialogue. Over time, Vivian felt that her world had become wider. She no longer lived in fear of being judged. Instead, she focused on helping others find the courage to live their truth. Her garden, which was once her quiet refuge, has now become a meeting place where people gather to discuss their feelings, dreams, and fears. David, in turn, found his place in this process. He started working on a project that helped people tell their stories through photos and videos. His works became little odes of love and honesty that resonated in the hearts of thousands of people. One summer evening, as they sat on the veranda enjoying the coolness, Vivian looked at David and felt that for the first time in a long time, her heart was full of peace. She knew that their fight wasn't over yet, but now she had confidence that they could overcome everything. Their story wasn't easy, but it was real. They proved that love is stronger than fear, and sincerity can break down walls that seemed insurmountable. Vivian realized that her happiness no longer depends on the opinions of others, but only on how she sees herself. This confidence became her new support, and she knew that no matter how difficult their future paths were, they would go through them together. Vivian and David no longer hid their love, but most importantly, they no longer hid from themselves.